Synchronicities are like the threads that connect our material lives with spirit. They are the storylines that don't quite mesh with our understanding of the world as we see it in front of us. Some people call them coincidences. People who are on the spiritual path usually understand that there's no such thing as coincidences. But people often ask, how do you experience more synchronicity in life? How do you expose yourself to more synchronicities so that your connection to spirit becomes deeper, so that your belief becomes deeper and your trust in that connection goes further than it is in the moment? And I think the answer to that is to pick up those threads of what appear to be coincidence, but with examination become synchronicity. And some of those threads that we pick up will play out in our lives, and we'll be able to look back and see the ways in which that thread of synchronicity led us to where we are and was entirely necessary for us to find our place. For me, an example of that would be my experience as a child when my grandmother told me about the death of her husband and how she heard a voice telling her that his death was coming in a week. And I picked up that thread as a child, and I followed my curiosity until this point where I feel I'm living my purpose because I picked up that thread. But there are other threads of synchronicity, threads of coincidence that don't play out in front of us, that are hard to see, or that will be clear and we will see, but we have to have patience in seeing it. And an example of that for me is when I was a child, I spent a lot of time in a very small town where there was a museum dedicated to Wilhelm Reich. It was his home where he lived before he died. Wilhelm Reich was a psychologist, a psychiatrist, I believe, and a scientist in the early to mid 20th century who was arrested for his beliefs and died in prison, but not before hiding a lot of his papers and telling his daughter not to release them until 50 years after his death, which was 50 years later, was 2008. So his papers have been released, and it's interesting how much humanity has shifted since then. Look up Wilhelm Reich. He's a fascinating, really amazing person and an amazing story. Anyway, I wasn't born in the town, but I spent a lot of time in this town where Wilhelm Reich's home was. And then I moved to New York when I was young and learned years after I had moved there that I lived in the neighborhood that Wilhelm Reich lived in when he lived in New York, which was in Queens. And his house where he lived, he had 2 houses, both of them right down the street from me. I could walk to the houses. And then shortly after that, I learned that one of the programs of study in the school I was attending was based on Wilhelm Reich's science of emotion. And then I went to visit his museum in that town I was telling you about, and I met someone, coincidentally, who had graduated from the same school that I was going to where Wilhelm Reich's program was happening. And so it took me a long time to pick up that thread. It took me a long time. I was in my 30s by the time I picked up that thread. But I picked it up, and I still hold it. And I consider Wilhelm Reich a spirit guide of mine and somebody who I call on for guidance and who comes to me on a regular basis. And I think I'm still learning about the way that his presence in my life has meaning. I don't think I've fully followed the thread yet. I think there are still synchronicities in there. But I share all of this because I think that's the key to recognizing synchronicities, to look at the threads of coincidence in your life and switch them to threads of synchronicity. Examine them, pick them up, follow them. And more you will start to notice the different threads of synchronicity that exist for you. And your connection to spirit will deepen and become more impactful for you because of your willingness to continue to pick up the threads.